people don't die in neat little boxes.
He had climbed in bed with her. She was going to tell on him.
He's wailing away at her over and over and over again.
There was a lot of blood.
This was the most brutal attack I had ever seen.
Every murder is a mystery. But a victim's body is a sea of evidence. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound, a piece of the puzzle. The medical examiner holds the key to unlock their stories and catch a killer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
People think Myrtle Beach is just a great place. Places to eat, places to have fun, places to go on the beach. You go down there, you enjoy your day.
A lot of the young people see Myrtle Beach as a great destination. Good place to come, get a start in life.
Aspiring singer Heather Stigliano moved to Myrtle Beach 2 months ago. When her family suddenly loses contact, they ask police to check on her.
There was a radio dispatch that I heard of a possible deceased person in an apartment on 3rd Avenue North in the area of Flag Street. As I was walking in the door, I could see blood spatter on the walls, on the couch, and seats that she was laying on the floor next to.
It's the scene of a gruesome homicide, and the young woman is quickly identified as Heather Stigliano.
I observed a butcher knife that was laying on top of the couch and appeared to have some red staining to me that appeared to be blood stains.
I mean, it was a one-room apartment where everything was all in one place. You could tell that there'd been a struggle by just the way she was laying there and her fingernails and stuff like that, where she had fought back. You could tell that she had fought back. It was really terrible. She had been beaten to death. You could tell that she'd been stabbed. You could tell that she'd been strangled. And that right there was different from I'd ever seen.
It's kind of a gut-wrenching feeling. Now, who could do something so evil to a person so young and beautiful as the girl was laying there? And just thinking to myself, how could this happen? You know, something's got to be done.
Detectives are determined to find Heather's brutal killer. But first, they must break the news to her family.
What had happened to Heather was quite a shock because it came out from left field. It wasn't something that we would even think would happen to my sister. You know, there was a part of me that felt that, you know, she was ripped kind of from me, from my life. Heather had a lot of friends, and everyone loved her. She was just one of those people that, like, when you met her, you loved her. When I first heard that Heather was moving to Myrtle Beach, I actually felt that there was a natural evolution for her because she loved being on the stage. I thought of the theaters down here in Myrtle Beach, and it just seemed natural.
investigators pore over Heather's apartment, gathering evidence and searching for any links to her killer.
I scanned further around the room, and I noticed some of the drawers open, clothing hanging out, things strewn about the apartment as if somebody had been rummaging through, looking for something. I'm thinking to myself, well, we have a deceased person who has evidently been murdered, and somebody rummaging through the apartment, probably for a robbery. We looked for a purse, wallet, ID, couldn't find any of that. I see a pillow laying on the floor underneath her head, which is not common for a murder, such vicious event that taken place. And I'm thinking, where did this pillow come from? You just don't murder somebody and graciously fall on a pillow.
Blood was not on the pillow like it would happen if she had been bleeding during the attack. I'm thinking they put the pillow under her head, feeling sorry for what they'd done and make her comfortable as they could.
It's a chaotic and confusing crime scene, and there are clear indicators that the perpetrator tried to cover their tracks.
I looked around the apartment, and you could tell where somebody had tried to clean up some blood and stuff. There was a lot of blood in different places and in the bathroom where you could see somebody tried to wipe up.
It's up to the coroner to help establish when the homicide took place.
He looks at the body, and then it was obvious that she had been there a length of time. Decomposure was just starting.
Time of death is really just an estimation, and at the crime scene, there are a few things that investigators will note in order to provide information. In this case, a rectal temperature was taken to try to estimate the time of death. In the early 90s, that was fairly common. However, now we recognize that that's not the best practice.
Preliminary analysis suggests the murder took place 6 to 10 days before the discovery of Heather's body. Dr. Jamie Downs, an FBI-trained expert in overkill murders, is assigned to Heather's case.
I've always been a kind of a puzzle solver, trying to figure out things, put things together or take them apart, as the case may be, to try to explain why things happened. I get very much a sense of satisfaction when I talk to a family and they are able to communicate with me, because if you think about it, their loved one is suddenly taken away, and now here I am. I come on the scene, and their interaction with me, that's how they're going to remember their loved one. I want that to be as good a memory as it possibly can be.
Dr. Downs meets with detectives Chestnut and Vela to gain insight into the case.
Prior to conducting the autopsy, I meet with the investigators who give me a thumbnail sketch. These are the circumstances of how we came to be involved, how we got the call, and what they believe might have happened. I don't want to be misled by someone else's preconceptions about the case. My job is to look independently.
Heather's body is released from the crime scene and sent to Dr. Downs for autopsy.
I look at Heather's body, and she has these areas on her chest and abdomen that are yellow abrasions. I can't tell you what they are, but I have a clue in her shirt, because when I take the shirt and pull the shirt down, I can see linear striated marks, lines on her shirt that have a very fine cutoff. And it doesn't take long before looking at the shirt, I realize those are shoe prints that are on the shirt, and they're shoe prints in blood. So that can personalize the perpetrator. You can lead you back to an individual, because one individual is going to have on shoes that have that same tread mark.
While Dr. Downs continues the autopsy, investigators use a chemical mixture to search for any trace of the footprints at the crime scene.
Amido black is a couple of chemicals mixed together that works with the proteins that is in the blood of everybody. If you had blood on the bottom of your foot and you left a footprint on the floor and you reach down with a paper towel or a washcloth and you wipe the print up off the floor, you spray this chemical on the floor and it brings up the footwear impression by the proteins that was in the blood. We found footwear impressions in the bathroom inside of the apartment building where the homicide had occurred.
The shoe print is a perfect match for the one Dr. Downs discovered on Heather's t-shirt.
The footprint that was found on Heather's t-shirt, it was a larger shoe and estimated to be a size 11.
There was a footprint that we could put to a shoe if we could just find that person, that shoe.
The first major clue in Heather Stigliano's homicide are footprints found both on the body and at the scene of the crime. While processing her apartment, detectives make another key finding.
There's a lot of black plastic pieces just scattered about on the sofa, on the floor, and I'm just wondering, where did these little black pieces of plastic come from?
We had no idea what it was, and we had them collect that. So if we knew that later on, that would tell us a story.
During the course of my examination, I can see in Heather's scalp hair pieces of black plastic. I don't know what it is, so I go through and I collect as much of that as I can find. While I'm collecting that, I see that she also has injuries within her scalp hair. So I have to shave the hair away so that I can document the injuries that are there. And in her case, there was a large grouping of abrasions. Again, another type of blunt force injury. She had 2 large lacerations on her forehead. Now, these were interesting because they were parallel to one another, and they had an interruption, an area that was not injured. This pattern was repeated, so immediately I think that if we get a weapon, I might be able to match that wound back to a certain weapon.
The trauma on Heather's body is widespread.
As I'm doing my examination, I noticed that there are a great many injuries. The right side of her face had a pattern injury that was roughly square, breaking the cheekbone and breaking the jaw. On her left neck was a similar area of linear abrasions. She had the cord from a lamp that was present at the scene tied around her neck. She had 3 stab wounds to her belly. All of these were yellow, so she had no blood pressure when these wounds were inflicted. There was no blood visible around the skin surface, so those are post-mortem injuries. I measure the wounds to try to see if I can get an idea of what weapon, obviously a knife of some kind, and the measurements there are consistent with the butcher knife that's found on the couch. A stab post-mortem, or any type of post-mortem injury for that matter, speaks to a certain level of overkill. This case is clearly overkill. That term simply means more violence than is necessary to commit the crime.
You look at the number of injuries and you look at the types of injuries. Is there a sexual component to the injuries? And all of that gives you an insight as to what kind of killer you're looking for. If there's a lot of intimacy to it, you may be looking at somebody who has a relationship or had a relationship with the deceased, as opposed to a random meeting on the street.
what's going through an individual's mind. It could be drug-fueled. Some of the things that might be happening are rage, and that rage may be fueled by anger at the victim, and that makes it a very personal crime.
Those closest to Heather could have key information about her life leading up to her murder.
We talked to Heather's mother. She told us about a relationship that Heather had with a fellow named Jack Norton, who was a member of the United States Air Force, and he was stationed at the Pope Air Force Base up in North Carolina. They had a relationship, they were dating. Heather didn't want to be serious. She broke it off.
Breakups can often be triggers that send people into a rage that they then act out on the person that broke up with them.
Jack Norton was definitely one of our suspects, so we put out flyers to Pope Air Force Base when I contacted security police and their OSI agents to see if he could be located. Security called back, and Jack Norton was not a pilot, but he was a possible loadmaster that flies on some of their cargo planes. He had been deployed to Saudi Arabia.
Norton is now stationed overseas, but investigators need to determine if he could have committed the murder before shipping out.
I'm looking for clues about time of death. So I'm looking at when did she die, because that's going to then lead investigators to a window of when someone could have committed this crime. So I look at several different things in order to estimate the time of death. I look at rigor mortis, which is stiffening of the body. I look at livor mortis, which is blood settling with gravity over time. And that will be a mobile pattern. And I look at body temperature, algor mortis. That is how much the body has cooled. I also look at other signs like skin slip in the body. I look at discoloration, bloating or mummification, insect activity. I spend some time looking at her fingers because they're unusual for this area of the country. Myrtle Beach, very hot, very humid. And in that type of environment, bodies, when they decompose, tend to bloat. They get wetter, for lack of a better word. But in Heather's case, her fingers were exactly the opposite. They were dried, they were mummified. That kind of change happens in a hot, dry environment.
It's an important clue, and one that could help investigators refine the time of death.
This case happened in winter. We know it had been chilly. We know that she had had the heater on. So that helps me kind of start thinking about how long she's been dead. I estimated the time of death differently than the coroner did in this case. I estimate the time of death between 4 and 6 days based on the condition of the body at the scene and when I looked at her in the autopsy room.
Dr. Downs' discovery means that Jack Norton couldn't be Heather's killer. He was over 7,000 miles away when the crime took place. Detectives turn their attention to another man in Heather's life.
Chris, he was a friend of Heather's, met her in Myrtle Beach.
They had a relationship, and we were told that he did stay in the apartment with her from time to time.
He would pay her so much to sleep on the couch or whatever.
Police learn that Chris works construction all over the area and would stay with Heather if he had a job nearby.
After we found out that he had been staying with her, we got in touch with him.
We found that he lived in the Lexington, South Carolina area, up around Columbia. And he would get up and go to work and come back, sleep on the couch, and then he would go back to other jobs, back and forth. So Chris was in our scope. We were looking at him. He was doing a job with Dargan Construction Company on a local hotel, building a parking deck. One of our detectives made contact with him, and he gave the information that he had not seen her for a couple weeks. He had been out of town back home on his regular job.
Detectives have a way to check Chris's alibi. The footprints discovered at the scene and on the body.
He was not a large fella. He was more of an average size, and his foot size was determined to be a size 8. Chris had an alibi, and it pretty much held up. We were never able to put him on scene.
Didn't feel like he was the one because he had an alibi for sure, but we wanted to know who he knew. Did he know anybody that knew her? He's telling us he didn't have no idea of anybody that would, have any connection to her. That, she was a sweet, innocent little girl.
So we were still trying to make determinations on the case. Who else could have been involved?
Heather's mother answers that question. She reveals shocking details of another crime involving her daughter.
My mother and my sister were very close. They kept in contact all the time. They were always talking.
Heather had told her mother that she had been sexually assaulted.
Heather didn't tell anybody at the time and was going to report it to the police, and she never got to report that to the police. She was dead before we ever found out.
A revelation from Heather Stigliano's mother provides the murder investigation a promising lead.
She mentioned to me that there was a guy that Heather had told her about that had possibly sexually assaulted her during a party while she was asleep in a bedroom. Heather had been to a Halloween party, and she went with some of the people that she worked with, and it ended up being on the Air Force Base. They were drinking at the party. She had passed out, and they left her there when they all went to eat. She told them that this one guy that lived at the apartment had stayed behind, and he had climbed in bed with her and had sexually assaulted her.
It's a painful discovery, and the accused is a well-respected officer in the Air Force.
Her mother said, "Heather, tell the police, make a report." Her friends told her, "Tell the police, make a report." And so she had decided she was going to do that. That made him a really good suspect in this murder, because I've got a guy that's in the service, he's got so many years in the service, and that this would ruin his whole career. The accusations, and especially a charge and being prosecuted for a rape.
A sexual assault also lines up with Dr. Downs' observations.
At the scene, her legs are wide apart. The right leg is rotated outward, so it was consistent with her genitals being exposed. I start looking now because I believe, based on her position, the panties, I'm thinking sexual homicide.
The body is examined, but no semen is found.
Sexual predators quite commonly don't ejaculate because it's not about the sex act, it's about the violence. It's about controlling their victim. They want to make their victim submissive. They want to make the victim think of them as God.
Detectives quickly uncover the identity of the pilot.
So we found out that the party that took place was at the home of a Robert Dolan.
I approach him and I take him into the police department, and I, ask him, did he have anything to do with Heather? Did he know Heather? And he said, yes. Was she at your party? Yes, she was.
Romantic obsession is a very potent obsession. It's one where an individual is consumed by the very thought of having the other person, of possessing them. And when they're turned away or rejected, that can become the final straw that turns them into a violent predator.
Investigators cannot prove he committed sexual assault, so they work to link him to Heather's apartment and the murder.
During the interviews, Robert Dolan was telling us he had his alibi that he was at work on the air base. Once he got off work, he was home with his wife. His wife confirmed that he was home every night during Heather's appearance, that neither one of them left the area. Robert Dolan and his wife both took a polygraph and both passed the polygraph.
Detectives remain suspicious. They keep searching for physical clues that will connect Dolan to Heather's murder.
Heather had defensive marks on her hands, as well as blunt force injuries, that is, bruising and abrasions on her arms. She fought for her life. She struggled to live.
Such a violent encounter would leave marks on the killer as well.
We looked at him, of course, and looking at him and talking to him, he had no scratches, no cuts, bruises, or anything that would have been obvious as hard as she fought.
Robert Dolan is cleared of Heather's murder. Worried that a depraved killer could escape justice, investigators run down another lead.
I learned from the friends of the family that she had a car that was not there. We were told she had a brown in color Chevy Monza, and it had a Pennsylvania tag, but we didn't have a tag number at that given point in time. The tip line from the media went out.
You get a pretty mixed bag when it comes to tip lines. Oftentimes when police put out a call for tips, they get a flood of different kinds of information from various people in a community. Most of those tips are not very helpful. And so police have the difficult task of trying to sift through what is credible and what is not.
The detective division received a phone call from a shop owner of an antique shop in Pawleys Island. Pawleys Island is a small community to the south of our county. We were told by the shop owner a suspicious subject came into his shop, and he had been driving a gold or brownish colored Chevy Monza.
He was trying to pawn or sell a camera.
The shop owner remembered him saying, "I work at Dargan Construction Company."
And that the man had like cuts and scrapes on his hands and said that he'd been in a fight.
The suspicious male was getting a little bit angry, agitated at the shop owner because he wouldn't purchase the items. And the shop owner told him that he needed to leave or he was going to call the police. Once the shop owner told him that he would call the police, the suspicious male turned, walked out, got in his car, and drove off. I'm asking the shop owner, since we don't really know who this subject is, would he be able to complete a composite drawing of our suspect? He told me he could.
The shopkeeper offers up one more vital clue.
He tells us that he got a tag from the car of the man that had come into the store.
The tag number, it came back registered to Heather Stigliano, our victim. I was elated. It's just like playing the game bingo. You're putting down all your numbers as they're being called out, and you just yell out, "Bingo, I've got my suspect." Of course, then reality hits. I still don't know who he is.
Detectives have a solid lead in the savage murder of Heather Stigliano. Now they need to put a name to the suspect.
The antique dealer said the suspect worked for Dargan Construction. And he got a good look at him, so we did a composite drawing.
We made copies of the composite and went to the construction site.
They were having a foreman's meeting, and I told them what we were investigating. I had a picture to show them, and I laid the composite drawing down on the table, and everybody in there said, "That's James Whipple."
We discovered that Chris Hawkins, was also an employee of Dargan Construction Company. And Chris Hawkins is the Chris that would sometimes sleep over on the couch at Heather Stigliano's apartment. And he knew James Whipple.
They gave me all the information on Whipple and said he'd left a week earlier, no notice, no anything, just was gone. And they told us that he had a partner that he worked with most of the time on the construction site. Then I went to talk to the other person that he had worked with for several months. He noticed the cuts and scrapes on his hands and everything, but he told him he had had a fight with his girlfriend and that he was leaving. He knew a good bit about him just from working with him, but he had never known him to have a girlfriend. And he said that he saw him a week ago in a brown car, getting ready to leave, said he was leaving, that he was tired of Myrtle Beach.
He gave us a brief description and said that James Whipple had been driving a brownish-colored Chevy Monza.
At that point, there was no doubt in my mind, that Whipple was our suspect.
Dr. Downs is also seeking an answer. He's documented 20 wounds on Heather's body, but the sheer amount of violence creates a question around her actual cause of death.
In this case, Heather had 6 different modalities of violence. She was stabbed with a butcher knife. She had another knife to her neck and behind her ear. She was strangled with an electric cord. She was beaten with a lamp. She was beaten with another object. She also had a dish rag that had been shoved down her throat so far that it obstructed her airway and would suffocate her. Her cause of death was complicated in that people don't die in neat little boxes of causes. You die physiologically from every single injury you have. So in Heather's case, she died from multiple blunt force injuries with strangulation and suffocation, including multiple sharp force injuries.
It's a heartbreaking assessment, and the exact murder weapon that caused Heather's massive head trauma still remains a mystery. Investigators hope all of their questions will be answered by locating James Whipple.
At this point in time, entering the vehicle into the National Crime Information Center computer as a stolen vehicle involved in a homicide, we had a name of James Whipple to be added as a suspect. This information is very essential. It goes out nationwide. Any law enforcement agency that can make a traffic stop, locate a vehicle, determine this is a stolen vehicle involved in a homicide.
2 nights later, a police officer in Melbourne, Florida, spots the car driving without headlights on.
A phone call comes in. They've located James Whipple. They checked the vehicle and have placed him under arrest.
They tell me that he's cooperating and that he knows, what the charges are. It's a great feeling when you put something like this together and you get your suspect.
During the crime scene processing, several items of interest were located. A size 11 shoe with the sole that matched the impression that was located and found on Heather's t-shirt. The shoe still had dried blood that had not been cleaned off. An item of very much interest was also located in Heather's car. And it was a clothes iron that was missing a lot of the black plastic.
Me and Detective Chestnut, we kind of look at each other like, wow, this is going to be our man.
Detectives seize several potential bloody weapons from Heather Stigliano's stolen vehicle.
We saw a clothes iron in there that was broken, some plastic pieces that were laying there with it, which told me what the plastic was that was at the crime scene.
The recovered evidence is sent to Dr. Downs for analysis.
Police bring me an iron that the suspect had in Heather's car. I really wouldn't think of that as being what caused the injuries to the head or to the arm, but I start looking at the base of the iron, and I realize it had this L-shaped pattern that the iron would sit on. Once I see the iron and I look at the base, I realize that it fits very well with the pattern on the top of the head, the repeated pattern. Actually, it's there 4, 5, 6 times.
After an exhaustive search, investigators have both the bloody shoes that left imprints at the scene and a key murder weapon, linking Whipple to Heather's brutal homicide.
So this is a dynamic struggle. The victim's moving, the suspect is moving, the iron is moving. And as the suspect is wailing away at her with this iron, it's not a static process. It's not repeated same motion over and over and over again. He's moving the iron. So different parts of the base of that iron are hitting her. And in addition, she's knocking it away so it doesn't come back down the same time. And there's a linear mark on the back of her right forearm that is the side of the hot part of the iron, the plate part of the iron.
Detectives confront James Bernard Whipple with the damning evidence.
When he walked in, it's kind of odd because you expect to see a monster. You really do. He didn't look at all like what I was expecting. He said, "I know you hear about Heather. I did it, and I want to get the death penalty for what I did." He said, "I'll give you a confession." And I actually look out the door and go, he's confessed. He's telling me everything.
James said he did it for money because of a habit, a bad habit. He was hooked on crack cocaine.
He went to Heather's house because he knew Chris had been staying with her some, and Chris had loaned him some money. He had knocked on her door, and he asked for Chris if she knew where he was at.
Heather gave him a number. He left. He dialed the number, but it did not go through. It was the wrong number. So he returned, knowing she would have money, and in a fit of rage, he first punched her in the face and then attacked her.
He said for $40 is all she had with her. I killed her for $40 because of crack cocaine. James Bernard Whipple told me that he came back and he'd felt so bad about it that he had put a pillow under her head so she could rest peacefully.
James Whipple is extradited to South Carolina on charges of first-degree murder, first-degree sexual assault, armed robbery, and grand larceny.
I still think about Heather a lot, how much she fought to live. You could tell by her hands, by everything, as much as she went through, that she fought as hard as she could to live. And it bothers me still to think of the moment she finally had to give up and know this was it.
This was a very evil incident, and now justice can be done. Let's take care of Mr. Whipple and take him to court and convict him.
The jury in Whipple's trial deliberate for 2 hours. They return with a decision of death by electrocution. In 1994, James Whipple is granted another trial and receives a reduced sentence of life with no chance of parole.
The worst thing that can happen has already happened. There's nothing I can do to change that. What I can do is give people answers where they didn't have any. And in the case of a homicide, hopefully I help the family and society find justice where otherwise there would be none.
What we found out from the ME's report is that she died within minutes, so that was a kind of a relief that she didn't suffer, for very long.
I think she'd be probably 46 years old now and probably have a family, kids and everything, and she never got to do that.
I've been in law enforcement 38 years. This was the most brutal attack I had ever seen.
I recognize that she's gone and there's nothing that I can ever do to bring her back. What I can do is try to do my job to the best of my ability and give them a little sense of peace and let them know that someone who actually cares, that someone who really cares did the best he could to take care of their child.